A woman materializes out of thin air, only to discover that she has a copy of herself in the same city. Meanwhile, a suburban woman fights who she believes to be an intruder who is coming into her home every night to kill her. These are two films directed by Natasha Kermani.
Kermani, I think.
These are two films directed by Natasha Kermani, who we are interviewing today on the Nightmare Hour podcast. I, of course, am joined by my co-host, Eric Havens. Hi, Eric. How's it going?
Hi.
Were you licking peanut butter off your fingers?
Kind of. For those at home and that are really jealous, I just opened a pack of vegan teriyaki jerky. So I'm going to.
What is the substance of that? The main substance? Soy?
It is.
Cetin?
It's non-GMO vital gluten wheat protein.
A lot of words in there. So today on the podcast, this is the first in our interview series this month. We have Natasha on discussing her career, her influences, and her first two films. Both of them are available now. You can find Imitation Girl on Amazon Prime, and Lucky just premiered on Shudder. Anything else you want to say before we dive into this conversation?
Just gratitude that we get to have this conversation, and gratitude for everyone listening, gratitude for vegan jerky, and gratitude for you, Adam.
Well, I drank a half a coffee during this episode, so maybe I get either more jacked out of my mind. I know I was clicking a lot in this episode because I was so nervous. I was just clicking on my own notes. So if you hear clicking, I apologize. But yeah, gratitude to you and to that vegan teriyaki jerky. And the sun is coming out. The world seems to be changing, and maybe we'll all be back together in the movies here soon. And just a shameless plug before we get into it. Our 9th annual Panic Film Fest is coming up in April. Tickets are on sale now. We'll have the lineup announced here in about 10 days. But I think it's one of our best film fests yet. And you can attend virtually. So wherever you're at, you have 2 weeks to be able to watch as many movies as you can. And there are a ton of movies, a lot of premieres, our signature shorts blocks, and then all of our special events fully available to you online as a virtual fest that you can enjoy from the comfort of your house, whether you're in Kansas City or you're on the coasts. It doesn't matter as long as you're in the U.S. If you're out of the U.S., unfortunately, you can't watch because everything's region locked, but you can get tickets now at panicfilmfest.com. I don't know if we're doing something, but we probably will.
Yeah, I'm excited for it regardless. If I'm not involved, I'll be sitting there watching, hopefully on a coast. It's like maybe take a vacation.
Yeah, on a boat.
Panic vacation.
A boat with very good internet. All right, please enjoy our conversation with Natasha Kermani.
Kermani. Oh, is that a doggy?
Yeah, there's a dog co-host.
He's sort of wandering in and out, but I think he'll settle down soon. He's sort of, I can banish him if he's being really distracting or loud. So
there's never been a dog that's made an interview worse.
Yeah,
it's not possible.
He's settling down now. He's lying down next to the heater, so I think he'll fall asleep soon.
Perfect. Okay, and then we'll just go right into an introduction of who you are. We'll do our beginning and exit off camera. So
great. Cool.
Eric, you want to start?
I do. I'll just start with like the very general getting to know you questions that you always do, just to get a baseline of where we want this conversation to go. And it's always interesting to me to talk to creative people and artistic people and just get a feel of how that became important to them, like your process in life, how you kind of fell into the arts and what kind of led you down this path, and storytelling and music and everything else that you do just personally.
Yeah. I think I was very lucky growing up because I had a parent who is in the arts, in performance art. And so, growing up, I was really around creative people. I was in literal black box theaters and, sort of being exposed to, not just classical theater, but sort of avant-garde work. And so, to be that young and sort of, around people like Laurie Anderson and Pamela Z, who are just sort of already interested in pushing the boundaries of what the performing arts can do, I think set a very sort of interesting bar for me at looking at the creative arts as a potential career. So I think that right off the bat is such a huge sort of blessing that I had, because I think a lot of people have to sort of get exposed to the arts, but then also start to process it as a potential career. So for me, it was always sort of a career. Can you hear him growling, by the way? He's like,
no, we
okay.
got one little woof and it was adorable. I
Okay.
loved it.
Just let me know. I'm happy to.
Well, we could just say that Natasha's puppy is right behind her, guarding her in case we do something wild in this interview.
Yeah,
this Zoom interview.
He's my PR. He wants to make sure I'm on the straight and narrow. Charlie, no, you're not going out there. So I think, having access to the performing arts like that as a kid was really important. And then, on the other side, that was sort of my mom's career, and my dad on the other end, was a huge cinephile. So he was sort of more interested in the more commercial side of the arts, meaning, blockbuster movies, science fiction, that kind of stuff. So I think I had, exposure to both of those sides, and that was really formative for me. From there, I think I just started discovering that film was an option. Before it was film, I was definitely interested in theater or some sort of performing arts. I studied music from a really early age. Again, my mother is a musician, so I was sort of, I joke I probably learned to read music before I read English language. So again, just a lot of arts, a lot of exposure at a really early age. So I was very fortunate with all of that. And then, so once I had sort of identified that that's something I was interested in, it was just about forming a trajectory that would get me closer to my goals of being a filmmaker. So, eventually making it to NYU Film School. And then out of film school, a few friends and I formed a small production company actually to support ourselves. So we were doing sort of like branded content and small commercials and that kind of stuff in New York. And sort of off of that community and the resources that we were able to gather through that work, we made my first feature film, sort of using those resources and, the crew, money, right? Just like savings that we were able to put into it. And that was all very much built from those years prior, working with brands. And we worked for like an e-publisher at first, which was pretty cool. So it's like all of those things sort of feeding into the next thing to get to that first feature. And then once you sort of have your first feature, I think you can start to get access to other projects and, producers and companies like that. So it's really sort of a build to that first project. And then of course, building on that first project to the next.
That's all. Yeah. That's also something that's always been very interesting to me, is because the two types of, I don't know if left brain, right brain is still a thing, but like the creative side of the brain is not necessarily cohesive into like the business side of getting like especially feature films made, like the investments, the money and all that. And it always interests me to find the people such as yourself that like do both sides. Like they have the creative part of it, but they also can navigate like the business side of it and get that creative.
I also partnered. So I have my production company. I have a partner, Tim, who is even more business minded than I am. So I think also it's about surrounding yourself and sort of finding your partners who are going to fill in sort of the places where maybe you're not as, I wouldn't say I'm like a business genius or anything like that. I have certain business instincts. But, Tim really is the business mind behind our company. And so, knowing that we have that partnership and we figure everything out together, but knowing that he is sort of, that's his focus, also allows me to be a little bit more free on the creative side and go out and look for stuff and, sort of take the initiative on that end of things, finding projects, finding people. So it's very much a pragmatic marriage of left brain, right brain, and who your partners are and who you're bringing into your creative life.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I've always just struggled with that. Like the creative part, no problem. I can make up stories all day long. But when it comes to like trying to sell yourself and marketing and investments and all that, is such a like foreign thing. It's strange that those two worlds have collided, and especially feature film, which is such a high cost endeavor. Like that people.
And it's constantly changing. Like that's the other thing is this is very much still a very young art. Film is not, aged.
Yeah.
We're still figuring it out. We're figuring out how the hell does this business model work? And then something like a global pandemic hits and suddenly bets are off. So I think it's a constantly morphing thing. And I think, you know, what for us, it's always been like, make sure your ass is covered and then take a baby step up, a baby step up, baby step up. And it's not glamorous. It's not cool. You know, we're not like suddenly jumping to $30 million movies, but you know, it's always been that attitude of like, we have to make sure the lights are on and then we can move forward.
Right.
I think you say you're not going to like 30 million overnight, but when I saw Imitation Girl, I was like, well, okay, this is the scrappiest, most ambitious film I've seen a no budget filmmaker make in a very long time. And I assumed that you were going to get the knock on the door from like a Disney, it just felt like the type of like indie first film that you're
available.
Like, yeah, well, it just felt like that huge jump of like, okay, she can easily do a big, you know, action sci-fi film, but this is what the indie sci-fi version of that same story looks like. But the scope was just so big, and it's a confusing movie because you're like, this is probably very low budget, but then at the same time you're like, but maybe not, because you know, you see those $1 million movies that you're like, I don't know where they spent $1 million on this film, but then you watch Imitation Girl and you're like, I don't know where they spent, how they spent whatever money you did have, because it's just such a big feeling film. And I guess to reel things back a little bit, you mentioned that your father was big into blockbusters, and I think both your films have this sense of scope to them and scale to them. Were those the, like most of us who love film, were those the first films that you really connected with? Were there any, like a couple in particular that you're like, oh, Back to the Future was the one that really blew my mind and set me on the journey to film discovery? Or do you have a couple films or filmmakers that really blew your mind as a young person?
Yeah, this is gonna sound so douchey, so please don't judge me. But you know, I actually remember this as a very, very young person. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I was at one of my grandparents' house, and 2001: A Space Odyssey was on TV. And I just remember it was like a dream, like sitting there and not wanting to move. And I have a huge family. We have like 30 cousins, and everybody was running around and screaming. And I have no idea what freaking channel was playing 2001, but it was on. And yeah, I was just completely drawn in. Obviously, I was like 7 or 8. I have no idea what was happening in that movie, but it was like the visuals, the music, everything just sucked me in. And I think my mom like laughs because she's like, yeah, it was so weird. I was worried that like something was wrong. And I was just like sitting there staring. And I think that's probably, you know, even to this day, when I think of that movie, I just think of like like red shapes moving. Like it's just this really organic, like sort of primal, dreamlike experience of that movie as a young person that really stuck with me. Then I would say, you know, Apocalypse Now, that was a game changer. I worked in movie theater in high school, obviously. And they would occasionally get their, you know, grubby paws on an old print of something. And so the first thing I saw was, it was horrible. It was such a mess, messy old print. But, you know, seeing it in the theater, the music, the intensity, the empathy with which Coppola directed that movie, while also not turning away from the cruelty of what was happening in the movie, was so mystifying. And there was like something mystical about it that also really stuck with me. So again, it's like those sort of pivotal moments of seeing the greats where you're having this emotional reaction and realizing like, oh, that's possible. Like that is an experience that somebody can bring in this format. And the last thing I'll bring up is a little bit more practical, and I'm pretty sure everyone of our generation would feel this way, but the fucking Matrix, man, like that
yeah.
Changed everything. It changed everything. And so that was a huge deal for sure. You know, as a film, it was a huge deal. But I also remember, obviously, I was like consuming everything I could. I remember watching the behind the scenes, and that was the first time I think that was like when it was becoming a thing. BTS on DVDs was like becoming more popular. And I remember watching it and thinking like, oh my God, there's like 3,000 people working on this movie. Like I could be one of those people. You know, there's so many jobs, and you know, they were explaining the bullet time, and I was like, wait, I don't get it, you know, and I rewound and I watched it again and I read about it until I understood it, you know, and that was something clicked in where you were like, oh, cool, this you can create paradigm changing technology. This is a marriage of science and art. And so that The Matrix for me as a technical piece was truly a game changer. So,
Well,
and there's so many more, but those are just a few memories that are super vivid.
you know, you mentioned the Matrix as a DVD, and I do think you're correct in that the special features. I remember vividly having another movie before that one came out advertising the Matrix on DVD, and it was like go down the rabbit hole like never before with behind the scenes features. And then I remember how they showed you bullet time. It was like they had like 1,000 cameras or 3,000 cameras, and they were like showing like, is this gonna work? But
yeah, they didn't know.
Yeah,
young guy. He was a young guy at the time. He the VFX soup was he was experimenting, right? Like he was trying something new. He was like really like, I don't know if this is gonna work or not, but let's give it a go. And it worked. It really worked.
I wonder what the movie would be like if it didn't. It's just like, yeah.
Well, it would still be an awesome kung fu movie. Is what would
absolutely.
It would have been like a really awesome cyberpunk kung fu movie, but it wouldn't be the
Well, it was one of the first. Oh, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Well, just on a tangible level, like the Wachowskis had done Bound, and it was like this small indie film that when I worked at Hollywood Video, not the name drop, it was we had one copy on VHS. We were in the transitional VHS DVD time, and it took me forever to see it. And then I saw The Matrix a million times before, and then watching Bound, you're like, that is a similar trajectory to Imitation Girl to a Marvel movie. It's just like this very scrappy, very indie movie. And then they're like, let us make this movie called The Matrix. It just is
but
like,
they kept their heart with it too. That's what's amazing to me. Like it was one, I mean, it was one of the first movies that I remember seeing that you can watch as that like kick-ass kung fu movie, but then when you really sit with it, there's so many like thematic issues there, like the trans stuff and all that, like the symbolic metaphorical stuff. And I don't know if it was, but it was like one of the first movies that's like that huge tentpole Hollywood movie that had all of that encapsulating in it, that wasn't just like total fluff, and that was incredible.
I think because they packaged it in that awesome kung fu sci-fi look, it's Keanu Reeves, which that we could talk about that for an hour, right? Like how to subvert within the system. I think that they're one of the most masterful filmmaking teams at doing that, maybe alongside the Coens, right? Like these are people who are able to put it, Bria Grant actually, to bring it back to Lucky, has a great way of putting it. She says like, it's not a spoonful of sugar, but she's like, it's a way to help the veggies go down,
Yeah.
And I think that's also really inspiring, the technical and the awesome kung fu aside, the idea of how to talk about real themes in a sort of candy sized package is really important.
I was thinking about that when you mentioned your childhood being like exposed to more of the avant-garde and your father being more of the Hollywood stuff, and Lucky kind of like captures both of that. Like it's a very it's a movie that's encapsulated as like a traditional narrative, but then it completely kind of goes avant-garde and really deals with things that could be argued outside of reality of that narrative, but it just shifts on it. And it's like this perfect conglomeration of what you're talking about, of like your childhood and your influences.
Yeah, for sure. It is definitely two worlds combining. But I will also say, my dad, he was always more drawn to stuff that did have meaning to it. So, he's from Iran. He grew up in a different place, and he would watch Star Trek, and that was like a really fundamental thing for him. And so, growing up watching Star Trek with him and with my aunt, at first you're just like, this is fun. And then as you grow up, you realize, oh, they're talking about real shit. Like this is real. This is real. And I think that was also the kind of stuff that he liked to watch together. We would watch like Braveheart, and actually he introduced me to Apocalypse Now. We didn't watch the full film together, but he showed me the Valkyries sequence when I was in middle school, and he was like, this is how you shoot a war scene.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I think in another life he wanted to be a film director, so I'm living his dream. But so I think that's there is always that sort of, there has to be a purpose behind it. And the stupid stuff is fun too. I totally get it as escapism. But, for me, if you're going to be dedicating years of your life to a project, there needs to be some deeper theme or some deeper message or question or something behind it that you can hold on to pull you through that process, because making a movie is really hard.
Well, that's one thing we every week here talk about on our podcast, is how genre can be a perfect escape popcorn film, but the best ones have something deeper under their themes, that more than just people being killed and blood being spilled, that there is a lot more going on. And that's like, conversationally, I think what really we deal with every week here. And I think both your films have a lot more, have very big ideas, even if their budgets aren't Hollywood budgets. And I think that's what's important. I think for good filmmakers, I think filmmakers that, someone like Coppola, I think you're somebody who made the biggest films, but always had a point to have something incredibly personal for him to say, right? Even if he, in his adaptations, of course, which he did many of them, he always had his perspective on something. And I think you've done that with both your films. Is that, well, I guess we can talk a little bit just more like genre outside the big films, like, more of the classic, I guess, horror sci-fi things. Is that something that, like, you connected with? I remember for us, we always talk about, Night of the Living Dead and what was done with that film. Both it's an independent film that blew everybody's mind, but it's a milestone film in terms of what it was doing with its cast and its themes. And it wasn't just this horror film, but it was a horror film with brains.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any films like that really kind of like, of course, Apocalypse Now is a big film, but is there anything,
A horror movie?
yeah, a horror or like a sci-fi film, like I remember seeing Pi for the first time being like,
Yeah.
what
I
I'm
was
14.
I was going to mention Pi, which, for me definitely doesn't really hold up anymore. But at the time I was like, whoa, what the fuck, and then
Yeah.
the idea that you could make something that was genre, but on a shoestring budget, and that you didn't need to make like a whole big, giant, big budget thing. You could tell a really contained, small genre story, and science fiction and horror can be made for $10 on an iPhone, or it can be made for $100 million, in a studio system. So that movie, I think, in Aronofsky's approach was really, that's definitely interesting. It's interesting also to go back to what you're talking about with Imitation Girl. It's sort of twofold, where, when we were starting to put the movie out there into festivals, I think we were laughing to ourselves a little bit, because we said, I don't know if we did ourselves a disservice here by making this movie look so good. Because there is a thing where it's like people associate a certain production value with a budget. And so by raising our production value, it's like, does this look like it should be more than it is?
Yeah.
So that was sort of interesting. And then I also think it's interesting that you say that, because we designed, and Lucky too, to a degree, but specifically Imitation Girl was designed to not be overly ambitious in scope. So every scene that's in the movie is backed into resources that we had available. And I think that's the right approach for an indie, is to sort of look at your resources and then back into it and see how you can design your scenes and your setups in a way that's not overreaching. And, and that's sort of the key there, or it was for me, maybe not for other people. And then to go back to your other question, sorry, I'm kind of hopping around a little bit. I would say Videodrome, Cronenberg, finding Cronenberg stuff, which of course isn't like super duper indie, but he still has, they're not big budget, crazy movies. I think that those movies are really interesting, and also it opened up the genre of body horror to me in a really interesting way. And then of course he goes on and does The Fly, which is a big movie, but sort of his earlier stuff that's a little bit crazy. It was fun. That was a lot of fun to discover.
I feel like he falls into that Wachowski. Like, when a Cronenberg's making a Cronenberg movie, no matter what system he's in, it's a Cronenberg movie.
He's just crazy. I mean, I think the Wachowskis have intention, and I think that they really do. They are super interested in starting conversations, which I think is so wonderful. But I think he's a little bit more like a fine artist, where he's like, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly.
You can take it or leave it, right? Like,
yeah.
A little bit more like performance art, I think, in that way.
Well, your first film it's, you know, we talked about the ambitiousness of it and the scope of it, but there's also a big difference between this and Lucky, and that's that your first film you wrote and directed, and then your second film you only directed. Can we talk about the differences in approach, I guess, and also how did it feel to direct somebody else's work? Because I'm guessing with all your commercial work, you're heavily involved in the writing and creation process typically, and was that the case with Lucky, or was it just you directing, taking her script?
It was very collaborative for sure. And I had definitely worked off of other people's script in the past. I mean, even it's more like theater, I guess, where you come to somebody else's writing. And so I think that's sort of you put your brain into that mode. I had done a bunch of shorts that were other people's scripts, as well as web series. So this was not my first time coming to somebody else's writing. This is something I had done a few times at this point and felt pretty comfortable with. But the key really is that Bria and I knew each other socially. We were fans of each other, and there's a lot of mutual respect. And so I think going into that relationship with a lot of transparency, honesty, we had a lot of conversations, just one-on-one conversations about the story and the script and her intention, my interpretation, before we even got much less into production and working with the team, before we even got into the room with Epic and trying to, pitch it and get money for it. We had already had a lot of those conversations, and there was very much an open, just a total open door policy of like any problem, any issue, no ego, speak what's on your mind. And that's honestly been how it's run since that first initial conversation has been our relationship. So that's been really great. And to Bria's credit, I think it's harder for her as a filmmaker to step away than it is for me to step into the room. So I think, she also takes a lot of the credit for being very professional and sort of curious about what I would bring to the project from day one. And also I think she appreciated that she could then just focus on the role, right? So she had a lot on her plate as an actor to do that role. She's in every scene. She's in pretty much every shot. So I think she was probably in a lot of ways grateful to be able to compartmentalizing a little bit and feel like, okay, Natasha's got it. She's going off and doing it. I can focus a little bit more on my role and my own work.
This is a pretty rare instance, though. So Bria wrote it and starred in it, and she's also a director and a producer in her own right. So was that nerve-wracking at all outside? You're directing the writer who's also a director. I mean, certainly that's like, it's I don't know. I'm trying to think of another situation where that's occurred, where there's, I guess, you have James Wan directing Lee Winnell. It's like the only other instance I could really think, but Lee wasn't a director at the time. Was that a challenge, or did that not even occur to you really? It was just like, this is, a collaboration and I'm directing Bria.
Yeah, it was a collaboration. I mean, again, I've collaborated with other filmmakers before. I think it's just about respect and honesty and communication. I think maybe people, I don't know. I would imagine maybe if Bria had a huge ego and was trying to, butt in on conversations and the decisions that I was trying to make, yeah, that would be very annoying. And probably I wouldn't do it, right? Like, I'm not going to do a project like that. So I think, again, establishing early on what the relationship would be was really key. And there were really no surprises. I guess she could have showed up and been like, wait, never mind, I actually have all these opinions about things. But I also tried to involve her in those conversations. So, we made a lot of these decisions together, right? Like yes, ultimately I was the final voice on things, but I tried to have her involved with the casting and the, some of the production design elements, the costume, how do you feel about this shirt? How do you feel like, and I think that was genuine. I genuinely wanted her opinion on things because I respect her. So no, I wasn't worried about it.
I'm stepping aside a little bit, but this is a question when I was reading a bit about you in prep for this and thinking about the films you've made, is the musical side of you that you mentioned and the musicianship and stuff, and even working on the score a little bit for Imitation Girl. Like, it seems like when I thought about it, it kind of makes sense because your films kind of have that very like lyrical musical kind of approach to it. Like you can almost hear like the 1, 2, 3, 4, like the just like that approach to it. And I was just wondering how you felt about that, if you intentionally like your different artistic avenues and stuff, of how that all comes together, like one influences the other, like your filmmaking might
For sure.
influence your musicianship and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, music is something that is just for me. So I made a conscious choice early on not to go down that path of being a professional musician, because I honestly just love it so much and I enjoy it and I enjoy playing, and I wanted it to be just for me and sort of
Right.
sacred. Whereas film is very much a career. So that comes with all of the stuff that is involved with that.
Yeah.
So I think the music is, and I say that in a way of saying like the music for me is the most fun part. Like that is where it comes in. It is something that I'm working on from the beginning. Like the first day that I read a script, I'm starting to think about what it sounds like. It's just something that's so important to me because I think it's a really intimate relationship with the structure of the script, is the structure and the emotions and the sounds of the movie. I'm trying to think if that makes sense. Yeah, like the structure of a piece of music should fit into the structure of the film in a really organic, sort of flawless way. And so and I think that's just a lot of fun because not every aspect of making a movie is fun, but that is, and I think a lot of people pick up on that when they watch my work, because the joy of working in that part comes through in the in the final product. Yeah,
it's just when it makes sense. Well, a lot of films feel very like, I don't want to say formulaic, but very like logical. Like they build up, there's all these, like they seed things and there's like this arc, but with yours it feels more symphonic almost. Like it felt like there's the crescendo, and like when you really think about it, it seems like there's a lot of that you bring into your sensibilities.
I'm very interested in that. I mean, another filmmaker who's hugely influential for me is Tarkovsky, and he writes a lot about, I mean, he's talking a little bit more about time and editing, but I've read a lot of his writing throughout the years, and every time I come to it, to me, it speaks to me more as music than time and editing. Because I think music is a little bit more expressive. Obviously for him, he was very into editing and montage. And I think there's something there, and I'm continuing to develop it, and I want to continue to explore the idea of shaping a film like a piece of music, because they are both, they are the two temporal arts, right? They're the two arts where the moment passes and that's it. You can't go back. I mean, now you can go back and rewind, but hopefully you're watching it in a cinema and it goes by and you have to just process it as it comes, and it starts and then it ends and that's it, like a piece of music. So I think that there's something really interesting there, and it's not just for the sake of structure for structure's sake. It's because I think that there's a more intimate, organic experience that you have with a piece of music that a lot of films don't have, right? Because the film is just very literal. It's like a documentary, right? We're recreating reality. But I think there's more potential to film, right? And that's why a movie like 2001 or a movie like Apocalypse Now, right? Like we were talking about those movies earlier. They go beyond recreating reality, right? They're really inviting you to have an emotional, non-intellectual experience, which I think is very, in my mind, very, very much connected to the experience of a symphony or a piece of music, whatever it might be. Pink Floyd, you know,
it's just one of those things I experienced and didn't really understand until I saw your background. I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, because Lucky's obviously more recent in my mind. Imitation Girl was a few years ago when I saw that, but there is like that, like everything's frenetic and then it's calm, and it's just like this rising. It's very musical, very lyrical, I guess.
Well, Imitation Girl is designed to be a fugue, so it's designed to be basically two distinct melodies that come together and then are actually form a harmony of some sort. And so that was sort of the structural thing for me, because it is the two stories that intertwine, that I was sort of interested in how a fugue is put together. And so that was that. And then Lucky, I think, if you guys are into music, I definitely, our composer, Jeremy Zuckerman, has done a few interviews on the movie, and he is just such a mad scientist, and we talked a lot about the structure of Lucky, and Lucky is very much similar in the way that it's two voices that are very distinct.
Mm-hmm.
Voice of May, the main character, and then the voice of the man as sort of like a symbol of her fear that is completely devoid of any like organic sound, really. He is like, all of his noise is made on a cello, percussive, like banging on the cello, plucking on the cello. It's this, again, frenetic percussive energy, and all of May's sounds are from a female vocalist. So it's the opposite, right? It's like taking two opposites and finding ways to sort of throw them at each other throughout the film. And that's sort of, that's also the structure of the movie itself, you know? So yes, absolutely. You're 100% onto something. And it's something I want to continue exploring with my work, and possibly, you know, digging in even deeper and finding more and more intimate, sort of like inextricable ways of tying the montage of the movie with the musical sound of the movie.
Absolutely.
Lucky has a pretty big, you know, it's got a lot going on, you know, both emotionally and what it's saying thematically. But one of the things that like struck me pretty hard, and I guess tying it into this being your second film, and your first one was very well reviewed. You know, I know when we played it at the fest, it did very well and people really enjoyed it and wanted to see what's next. And that's always the thing, is like, what's next? You're like, can I just live in this moment? But there is like, you know, you see May being kind of hassled, and everyone's living in the past of her work and wants her to repeat it. And can you outdo yourself in a similar fashion? And you know, the creative, I guess, force of that nature, like, can we just talk about how that ties into your own career and what you wanted to kind of discuss and have the character show, especially in that book, you know, the book conversation, which she's talking. I think that note throughout the whole thing and how it ties in, and the success and failures of what you continue to do, your work you continue to put out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really funny. Obviously, it's Bria's script, so that's her words. But I really loved those scenes. I mean, I was laughing even reading the script the first time. So I was really excited to sort of show a woman in that seat where, you know, she is in this situation where you're like, I'm so happy to be here, but also, you know, give me a break. Let me live. Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, it was just the humor of it and poking fun. I think that the film industry takes itself so seriously, and it's really quite silly what we do, you know? So I really enjoyed the idea of poking fun a little bit at you know, what we do. Because obviously that character is a very thinly veiled version of us and what we're all doing. You know, even the idea that she's a self-help book author is hysterical to me. You know, it's like someone whose whole career is over having the answers, and it's like, none of us know what the hell we're doing. Like,
yeah.
So it was just about poking fun and having a little bit of fun of it, because I think also my work can tend to be a little bit heavy and, you know, take itself a little bit seriously sometimes. So it was good for me to sort of, you know, be pulled out of that and try something that was a little bit poking fun at ourselves.
What stuck out to me in there, and I don't know if I'll phrase this properly, but I just thought about it, but like when everything's coming to a head towards the end, when things get a little more like avant-garde, for lack of a better phrase, when the other women are like yelling at her for not being able to help in those situations, and her saying, I can't do this, I can't help. And just that focus on that self-help person and that person that they see as an authority, like, please help us, without ever like thinking to hold the men accountable, or like that the man in this movie. Mm-hmm. Just like that kind of theme, that seemed like a very interesting take in how it was approached, because I think we get that a lot of I don't think that's as far as victim shaming, but we're not really dealing with the systematic part of it. We're just dealing with like why aren't you helping more? Why aren't you assisting more? And blaming the person who's trying to deal with this themselves, instead of like looking at the larger system that enables all of this.
Yes, but I think it is also important to hold ourselves accountable. And I think that is a moment that is talking about, you know, for me, when I read it for the first time, of course you empathize with the situation, but it also holds up a mirror to the times that maybe, I wasn't an ally when I needed to be
Right.
an ally for somebody. And I think that there's a way of doing that. And I hope we did that in the movie where it doesn't come off as victim blaming, but it does hold up a mirror. And of course, May is a white woman. She's a wealthy white woman. Who has a career and has financial stability, and looking at that and asking, hold a mirror up to yourself and ask, when were there times when I could have helped, or but I didn't because I was dealing with my own shit.
Yeah.
And again, not in a prescriptive way, not saying bad person, you should have gone and helped those people. And I think that was the really tricky line to ride there, is that when she does have that speech of saying, I don't have the answers, that it does both of those things at the same time, where you do empathize with her and you realize where she's coming from and that she is exhausted, but that everybody has to do better. So
I know, yeah.
Two things at once.
Absolutely. And that's what that whole sequence kind of gave me, was like kind of that unease of like, how do I feel about all this, how this is like playing out right now? Like, which side am I on? And it's not an easy answer.
It's not an easy answer. And I think that there is no answer in a lot of ways. And I think that's also the end of the movie, is it does not provide any resolution. We give some movie answers, but there's no larger solution that we're positing. It's really just meant to be the start of a conversation instead of the end of one.
Before, I know we have only a couple minutes left, but this film was originally supposed to come out as one of the Midnighters at South by 2020. Of course, that was delayed because of the pandemic, but it's your second movie. It's a pretty significant, I think, jump up for you in terms of, I guess, everything really, like from budget to just the type of film it is. It's a little bit more of a mainstream, I think, storyline for people to grab onto. That was all delayed. Now the film is available via Shudder, but you kind of miss out on having, your second big jump forward that would have presumably played a number of festivals, and you would have this whole press tour and all those things that come with it, and screenings in real theaters, followed by the traditional release later on Shudder. How was it in the last year to have such a delay, and how has that, I guess, impacted anything going forward for your future? What has the pandemic done for Lucky and for your creativity, I guess, is the simple way to put it.
Yeah, that was a real bummer. I am super grateful that I have Bria as my partner for this, because we were sort of able to work through it together. And I think ultimately, she had two movies. She had a movie in Tribeca that also, so, being able to talk to her through that and sort of recalibrate and have a partner in that was like really essential for me, emotionally and also logistically for the movie, because we were able to sort of make decisions together. We were really partners through that whole process, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm bummed. I think I can't think of a better way to have the movie out in the world than like with a bunch of drunk people in Austin, Texas, at watching a midnight movie. Like that's the perfect that's the perfect launch for this movie. So I'm bummed that I never got to sort of like get the reactions of that. A good friend of mine has a big, beautiful backyard movie screen home theater. So he very kindly over the summer, it was like me, my fiance, and like 3 friends basically did like a socially distanced screening of it. So we got to see it on a big screen. And that was just so cool, because even though it was like 6 people, I could hear them sort of reacting. And so that definitely was ticked a box for me, and I got to hear it and see it on a big screen. It's so interesting. I was actually, so things are picking up again now, but we basically lost a year. I mean, we basically lost a year of movement in a lot of ways, but I think what we gained was hitting pause, not having that go mentality for, 9 months or whatever it was. I would say really it feels like after the inauguration, things started sort of taking shape again, starting to move forward and have a little bit more confidence, putting projects together. So now I'm sort of back in the grind of that. But yeah, I mean, I adopted a dog. My fiance and I adopted a dog who you've met.
Yeah.
He's like a 10-year-old mutt. He's a total pain in the ass, but it's great. And yeah, I think like life stuff, honestly, life stuff, sitting down, really asking like, what are the projects that I want to do? Kind of what we were talking about before, like what are the messages? What are the themes? What holds my interest, instead of just jumping and grabbing at the first thing that kind of comes my way, but to really take the time and process. So I'd say that's the silver lining, if there's any silver lining.
Absolutely. I experienced that. It's just like, while it was really hard and you missed out on a lot of like release and traditional way that films are supposed to be seen and how you're supposed to interact with them, it did give your life, even though it was hard at the time, it gave it pause and a lot of introspection and processing and like really analyzing what your life is and what's important to you. So while it was a terrible loss of a year, I think it did help like realign like a lot of people to like refocus on what's important in their own lives and where they should be heading. Yeah.
Big time. I got off Twitter. That was awesome.
Oof.
got off everything except, Instagram, and, got back on the phone with people. Like I call people now. Mm-hmm. One of my best friends and I have a weekly Friday afternoon phone call. It's like slowing down and putting those things back into your life and like trying to treasure those things and be like, this is important. This is from this hour to this hour, I'm talking to Lauren. That's it, So I think that stuff is really important.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending the almost hour with us. We really appreciate it. Of course, but I believe Imitation Girl is also streaming. If not, you can rent it on Amazon.
It's on Prime. Imitation Girl is on Amazon Prime. So if you have Prime, you can watch it for free.
I have a physical copy somewhere behind me. It was one of my favorites from 2017. And then of course, Lucky is now streaming on Shudder. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, Natasha.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the great questions. It was lovely to chat.
Yeah, and give the doggy pets for us.
I will. He's finally settled down.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, that was our interview with Natasha. She gave us almost a full hour. She almost did the full Nightmare Hour podcast. And that was a great conversation, and one of many that I think are coming this month. Who knows what will happen on the Nightmare Hour podcast as we celebrate.
We don't.
Yeah. As we celebrate a full month of women for National Women's History Month. I got it.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Feels good. Mm-hmm. And I guess we could say who's on the next podcast, right? Because we have confirmed that.
Sure. If you want to, if you feel comfortable. I mean, I just get nervous. I get nervous just because life. Like,
I don't even know if I'm going to be on the podcast every week.
Exactly. Like, I feel nervous every time we say "see you next week." I'm like, I don't know.
Maybe not. Maybe. Okay. Well, we won't say anything then. But we at least have one more guest. We think we'll have two more guests this month. So as always, if you like the podcast, please share with your friends, family, and yourself, because you're important too. Yeah, and you need to be reminded that we exist. If you want to chat with us, nightmarehourpod@gmail.com or on any of the social medias, you can message us. Eric will presumably be the one on the other side of the keyboard that you will be speaking with. But yeah, that's it, right? The hour may be over, but the nightmare keeps ticking. The new sign off is great. Yeah. I hope you like it. If you don't like it, email us at the Nightmare Hour Pod. Let us know. But until next time, I'm Adam, and that's Eric.
Hi. Bye.
See you later. This was the Nightmare Hour podcast.
Thank you.